Now to an Eyewitness News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence.
2 million layoffs, rent still rising, winter temperatures dropping. Across America, families who were working just months ago are now losing their homes. Not because they failed, but because the system broke faster than they could react. This is not a future warning. This is happening right now. By early 2025, layoffs in the United States exceeded 2 million confirmed job losses according to official filings and Labor Department data. This number excludes reduced hours, contract terminations, and gig work cancellations, meaning the actual impact is significantly higher. Unlike previous economic downturns, these layoffs aren't isolated to one industry. Technology, retail, logistics, trucking, warehousing, healthcare administration, and manufacturing are all shedding workers simultaneously. Large employers are restructuring to protect cash flow as borrowing costs remain elevated. Companies that expanded aggressively between 2020 and 2022 are now downsizing to pre-pandemic staffing levels or lower. Middle management positions are being eliminated at high rates, removing stable, salaried incomes from millions of households. Many layoffs happen without severance packages. Short-notice terminations leave families with little time to prepare financially. Unemployment benefits typically replace only 30 to 40% of prior income, and approval delays can stretch several weeks. During that gap, rent, utilities, insurance, and food costs remain unchanged. The timing is critical. Layoffs are accelerating just as winter expenses peak. Heating costs increase household bills by 20 to 35% in colder states. For families already spending over half their income on housing, even a short interruption in wages creates immediate risk of missed rent and housing instability. This perfect storm of job loss and rising seasonal costs is pushing working families toward homelessness faster than ever before. Winter is the most dangerous season to lose income. During cold months, households face unavoidable costs that cannot be deferred. Heating, electricity, winter clothing, vehicle maintenance, and higher food spending all peak between December and March. For a typical household, winter utility bills alone can rise by $150 to $400 per month, depending on region. At the same time, seasonal employment opportunities disappear. Construction slows, landscaping stops, tourism contracts, and temporary retail jobs vanish after the holidays. Families cannot rely on short-term work to bridge income gaps the way they might in summer months. School schedules also limit flexibility. Parents cannot relocate easily or take overnight work without disrupting childcare arrangements. Missing school risks intervention from social services, creating additional pressure to stay housed at all costs, even when rent becomes unaffordable. Emergency housing systems are overwhelmed in winter. Shelters fill rapidly due to cold exposure risk, leaving families with fewer fallback options. Waiting lists grow longer precisely when demand is highest. Winter evictions also happen faster. Courts often process cases in bulk after holiday delays, meaning families can face removal within weeks of missing rent. Cold weather moratoriums are limited and vary by state, leaving millions unprotected. This combination of higher costs, fewer job options, slower assistance, and faster enforcement means a single layoff in winter is far more likely to result in housing loss than the same event in warmer months. Despite rising unemployment, rents remain elevated in most metropolitan areas. As of early 2025, national median rent is still 20 to 30% higher than pre-2020 levels, depending on region. In many cities, rents increased again in late 2024 due to higher property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance costs passed directly to tenants. Landlords face rising expenses themselves. Property insurance in some states has increased by 30 to 60% over 3 years. Municipal tax reassessments have pushed property taxes higher, especially in growing metro areas. These costs are embedded into rent prices regardless of tenant income trends. Vacancy rates remain artificially tight. Institutional investors and large property owners often keep units vacant rather than lower rents, protecting long-term valuation. This reduces available supply without reducing prices. Rent increases hit hardest at lease renewal. Tenants may face $150 to $400 monthly hikes with 30 to 60 days notice. For households already stretched thin, these increases arrive without warning or opportunity to prepare. Unlike mortgages, rent offers no payment stability. Tenants bear the full risk of inflation, layoffs, and economic shocks. When income falls, rent does not adjust downward in response. As a result, families experiencing job loss are not facing static housing costs. They are facing rising ones. This mismatch between declining income and fixed or increasing rent is a central driver of housing displacement in 2025. Official eviction numbers significantly understate the crisis. Many families leave before formal filings to avoid permanent records that make future housing harder to secure. These self-evictions are invisible in court statistics, but widespread across the country. In 2025, eviction filings are rising sharply in mid-sized cities and suburbs, not just major metros. Court systems report increases of 15 to 30% year-over-year in many counties, with the highest growth among families with children. Once rent is missed, late fees compound quickly. A household behind by $1,800 can see that balance exceed $2,300 within weeks due to penalties, legal fees, and interest charges. Catching up becomes impossible without immediate income recovery. Eviction records follow tenants for years. Many landlords automatically reject applicants with prior filings, even if circumstances were temporary. This forces displaced families into informal housing, overcrowded arrangements, or vehicle living. Winter accelerates this process. Shelters reach capacity early in cold months, leaving families to move multiple times through motels, relatives' homes, and cars before stabilizing. Eviction is not a single event, but a chain reaction. Once housing is lost, job stability suffers, childcare arrangements collapse, and recovery becomes exponentially harder. In 2025, evictions are not isolated incidents. They are a structural outcome of economic pressure where housing costs have detached from wage reality and safety nets have failed simultaneously. Before layoffs began accelerating, households were already financially exhausted. Inflation between 2021 and 2024 drained savings through higher food, fuel, insurance, and utility costs. By late 2024, surveys showed that over 60% of Americans could not cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing. Many families entered 2025 with zero financial cushion. Paycheck-to-paycheck living became normalized even among middle-income earners. When layoffs occur, there is no buffer period. Missed income immediately translates into missed bills. Credit cards temporarily delay collapse, but at a significant cost. Average household credit card balances now exceed $6,000, with interest rates above 20%. Using debt to pay rent creates compounding obligations that worsen financial instability over time. Retirement withdrawals are increasing. Families are tapping 401k accounts early, triggering penalties and long-term damage to financial security. This provides short-term relief, but accelerates future poverty risk. Without savings, families lose negotiating power. They cannot relocate, absorb rent increases, or withstand income gaps. Housing becomes fragile, dependent on perfect continuity of employment. In 2025, the loss of savings is not merely a symptom. It is the underlying condition that turns layoffs into homelessness within weeks rather than months. The financial foundation that once provided stability has completely eroded for millions of working families across America. The traditional safety nets designed to catch families after job loss are failing simultaneously. Unemployment insurance is limited in duration and amount. In most states, benefits last 26 weeks or less, with average payments between $300 to $450 per week, far below the median rent of $1,400 to $1,900. For many households, unemployment covers less than half of monthly housing costs. Housing assistance programs are overwhelmed. Section 8 waiting lists in many cities exceed 3 to 7 years, effectively eliminating it as an emergency solution. Emergency rental assistance funds distributed during the pandemic are largely exhausted, and new funding has not matched rising demand. Food assistance is also stretched thin. SNAP benefits were reduced after emergency expansions ended, cutting monthly support by $90 to $250 per household. This forces families to choose between food and rent, accelerating housing loss. Nonprofits report record caseloads. Many organizations now serve double the number of families they did in 2019, with fewer donations due to economic uncertainty. Assistance is often limited to one-time payments that do not solve ongoing affordability gaps. The result is a coverage gap where families earn too much to qualify for aid but too little to survive without stable income. Once inside this gap, households experience rapid decline with no institutional support capable of stopping it. By 2025, vehicle living has become one of the fastest-growing forms of emergency shelter in the United States. Families are increasingly turning to cars, vans, and RVs not by choice, but because traditional housing options are unavailable. Estimates suggest over 350,000 people now live in vehicles nationwide, with numbers rising sharply in suburban areas. Vehicle living offers temporary protection from weather, but it introduces new risks. Fuel costs add $150 to $300 per month. Insurance must be maintained, and mechanical failures can instantly eliminate shelter. A single breakdown can result in total displacement. Parking restrictions make survival unstable. Many cities enforce overnight bans, time limits, or residency requirements. Citations range from $50 to $250 per violation, quickly compounding into unpayable fines. Vehicles may be towed after repeated tickets, removing both shelter and transportation. Families with children face additional challenges. Sleeping in vehicles risks involvement from Child Protective Services in some jurisdictions, forcing parents to hide their situation rather than seek help. Vehicle living also limits employment recovery. Without stable parking or sanitation access, maintaining work schedules becomes difficult. Showers, laundry, and rest are inconsistent, directly impacting job performance. What was once seen as a niche lifestyle is now a symptom of housing system failure. Vehicle living is not solving homelessness. It is delaying its most visible form. Homelessness in 2025 is no longer concentrated in large cities. Suburban counties are experiencing some of the fastest growth in housing instability. These areas were built for car ownership and single-family housing, not for emergency shelter or social services infrastructure. Rents in suburban markets increased 25 to 40% since 2020, driven by population spillover from cities and limited multi-unit housing supply. At the same time, suburban wages have not kept pace. This mismatch pushes families into crisis faster than in urban cores where assistance infrastructure is stronger. Suburbs often lack shelters entirely. Families displaced in these areas must travel long distances for aid, creating transportation barriers. Public transit is limited or non-existent, making access to jobs and services more difficult once housing is lost. Local governments are responding with enforcement rather than expansion. Parking restrictions, zoning enforcement, and nuisance ordinances are increasingly used to remove visible poverty rather than address its underlying causes. School districts are reporting rising numbers of housing-insecure students. These children often remain enrolled while living in motels or vehicles, masking the scale of the problem in official homelessness counts. The suburbanization of homelessness makes the crisis harder to track, harder to serve, and easier to ignore. It also signals that housing instability has reached populations previously considered economically secure. The crisis is no longer an urban problem, but a national emergency. Housing loss in 2025 is increasingly driven by the interaction of health costs, debt, and employment instability. Medical expenses remain the leading cause of personal financial strain, even for insured families. Deductibles commonly range from $3,000 to $8,000, enough to destabilize rent payments after a single illness or emergency. Missed work due to health issues often precedes layoffs. Reduced hours or unpaid leave can trigger a downward spiral where income drops first, then debt rises, and housing loss follows. Once rent is missed, recovery becomes unlikely without immediate intervention. Debt compounds the problem. Auto loans, credit cards, and medical bills compete with rent for limited income. Households juggling multiple debts are more likely to default on housing first, as eviction takes time while creditors pursue collections immediately. Stress-related health issues increase after displacement. Studies show that housing instability raises rates of anxiety, depression, and chronic illness, further reducing employability and recovery prospects. Healthcare access becomes inconsistent after eviction. Without stable address or transportation, appointments are missed and conditions worsen, increasing long-term costs for both individuals and the healthcare system. In this system, housing is no longer separate from health or finance. It is the foundation that holds everything together. Once it collapses, every other system begins to fail simultaneously, creating a cascade that becomes nearly impossible to reverse. The pace of housing loss in 2025 is outstripping the ability of governments to respond effectively. Policy changes move slowly, while layoffs and rent increases happen monthly. By the time assistance programs are approved and funded, families are already displaced. Most housing policy focuses on long-term construction, which takes 3 to 10 years to produce units. This does nothing for families losing homes today. Emergency solutions remain underfunded and temporary in nature. Local governments face budget constraints. Falling commercial property values and sales tax revenue reduce funds available for housing programs, just as demand peaks at unprecedented levels. Coordination between agencies is limited. Employment offices, housing authorities, courts, and social services operate separately, forcing families to navigate complex systems while in crisis without guidance or support. Political debate delays action. Housing affordability is treated as a future issue, not an immediate emergency. Meanwhile, displacement continues at scale across every region and demographic. The result is a widening gap between need and response. Millions of families are falling through this gap every month. As long as layoffs, rent inflation, and winter costs continue colliding, housing loss will remain one step ahead of any solution. Without immediate intervention and coordinated response, winter 2025 will transform temporary displacement into permanent homelessness for hundreds of thousands of American families who never expected to be at risk. In 2025, families with children are becoming the fastest-growing segment of the homeless population. School districts across the United States report sharp increases in students classified as housing insecure, meaning they are living in motels, vehicles, overcrowded homes, or temporary arrangements. Federal education data shows child homelessness rising by 15 to 20% year over year in multiple states. Families with children avoid shelters whenever possible. Many shelters separate by gender or age, making it difficult for families to stay together. Parents often choose vehicles or motels to keep children safe and enrolled in school, even when conditions are unstable. Motels have become de facto family shelters. Weekly motel rates now average $400 to $600, often paid using credit cards or short-term loans. This drains resources rapidly and provides no long-term security. Children experiencing housing instability are twice as likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and academic disruption. Absenteeism increases sharply after displacement, even when families try to maintain normal routines. Because many families remain hidden, official homelessness counts significantly understate the problem. These children are not sleeping on sidewalks, but they are not housed either. Once families with children lose stable housing, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Relocation disrupts childcare, employment, and education simultaneously, locking families into prolonged instability that can last years. As housing loss increases, many cities are responding with enforcement rather than support. In 2025, over 150 municipalities have expanded or enacted ordinances banning overnight vehicle sleeping, public camping, or extended parking. These laws disproportionately impact newly displaced families. Fines escalate quickly. A single overnight parking citation may cost $75 to $150, but repeated violations can exceed $1,000 within weeks. Failure to pay can result in warrants, license suspension, or vehicle impoundment. Towing is catastrophic. Average impound fees range from $300 to $700, often requiring proof of registration and insurance that displaced families cannot provide. Losing a vehicle often means losing shelter, transportation, and employment access simultaneously. Criminal records compound the damage. Even minor citations create barriers to housing applications, employment background checks, and financial recovery for years afterward. Enforcement costs cities millions annually, yet does nothing to reduce homelessness. It simply displaces people repeatedly, pushing them further from stability and recovery. This shift turns economic hardship into legal trouble. Families who were renters months earlier now face fines, court dates, and criminal records, not because of crime, but because they cannot afford housing. The system criminalizes poverty instead of addressing its root causes, trapping families in cycles they cannot escape without intervention. Adults aged 55 and older represent one of the fastest-growing groups facing housing loss in 2025. Fixed incomes tied to Social Security have not kept pace with rent inflation. While benefits rose modestly, rents increased 3 to 5 times faster in many regions. Seniors renting face unique risks. Many lack savings, cannot increase income, and face health-related expenses averaging $6,000 to $10,000 per year out of pocket. One rent increase or medical event can trigger displacement. Eviction is especially devastating for older adults. Recovery prospects are limited, and waiting lists for senior housing often exceed 2 to 5 years. Once displaced, seniors are more likely to experience chronic homelessness. Vehicle living among seniors is rising. Many choose RVs or vans to maintain autonomy, but age-related mobility issues make this dangerous. Cold exposure, medication storage, and access to restrooms become serious health risks. Homelessness significantly increases mortality risk for older adults. Studies show life expectancy drops sharply after displacement, particularly for those with chronic conditions requiring consistent medical care. This crisis is quietly dismantling retirement stability. Seniors who worked for decades are losing housing not because of reckless behavior, but because fixed incomes cannot survive today's rental market. The promise of secure retirement is evaporating for millions of older Americans who followed every rule and now face displacement. In previous downturns, finding a new job often meant regaining housing. In 2025, that link is broken. Many re-employed workers earn less than before, often accepting 10 to 30% pay cuts or part-time roles without benefits. Rents do not adjust downward. A household that loses housing during unemployment often cannot qualify for rentals even after securing new work. Income requirements typically demand 3 times monthly rent, excluding utilities and existing debt obligations. Application barriers are rising. Landlords increasingly require high credit scores, spotless rental histories, and upfront fees totaling $3,000 to $6,000 to move in. For displaced families, this is unattainable. Eviction records linger. Even resolved cases reduce approval odds dramatically, forcing families into informal or unstable housing arrangements. This creates a new class of employed homeless. People are working, paying taxes, and contributing economically, yet remain unhoused due to structural barriers beyond their control. Employment alone no longer restores stability. Without systemic changes addressing these barriers, housing remains out of reach even after income returns. The traditional pathway from unemployment to re-employment to housing recovery has collapsed. Families are discovering that getting a job is no longer enough to escape homelessness. The housing market has fundamentally disconnected from employment reality, leaving workers trapped in perpetual instability despite full-time employment. Most homelessness statistics rely on annual or biannual counts. These methods fail to capture rapid displacement occurring within weeks or months. By the time data is published, conditions have already worsened significantly. Point-in-time counts miss families living in vehicles, motels, or temporary housing. As a result, official numbers may undercount homelessness by 30 to 50% in some regions. Eviction data also lags. Many courts do not report informal displacement or settlements reached before hearings. This hides the true scale of housing loss from policymakers and the public. Policy decisions are being made using outdated information. Funding allocations reflect last year's conditions, not current realities on the ground. The delay between crisis and recognition creates a feedback loop where response is always behind need. By the time systems react, damage is already done and new crises have emerged. This data gap allows the crisis to grow quietly until its effects become unavoidable. Families are experiencing displacement in real time, while official statistics show a problem far smaller than reality. Without real-time data collection and responsive policy systems, governments will continue addressing yesterday's crisis while today's families lose housing. The measurement systems themselves have become barriers to effective response, leaving millions unrecognized and unserved while the crisis accelerates beyond what official numbers suggest. Winter 2025 is not just another seasonal hardship. It represents the collision of multiple long-term failures happening simultaneously. Housing costs remain elevated. Wages have stagnated, layoffs are accelerating, safety nets are depleted. Once families lose housing in winter, recovery timelines extend dramatically. Cold weather limits mobility, employment options, and relocation possibilities. Displacement that begins in winter often lasts months or years, not weeks. The volume of affected households is overwhelming local systems. Shelters, courts, schools, and nonprofits are operating beyond capacity with no relief in sight. This is no longer a temporary downturn. It is a structural breakdown where housing affordability has detached from income reality for working families. If conditions remain unchanged, winter displacement becomes permanent instability. What begins as missed rent becomes chronic homelessness affecting entire families. Winter 2025 marks the moment when the housing crisis shifts from warning to consequence, impacting millions who never expected to be at risk. The systems designed to prevent homelessness have failed comprehensively. Housing has become unaffordable. Jobs no longer pay enough. Savings are exhausted. Safety nets are overwhelmed. Without immediate, large-scale intervention, this winter will transform temporary hardship into generational poverty. America is witnessing a structural collapse of housing stability. The question is no longer whether this crisis exists, but whether response will arrive before displacement becomes permanent for millions. This didn't happen by accident. It happened by design and neglect. In the next video, we break down how new housing and vehicle living laws are quietly making this crisis even harder to escape. If this is affecting you or someone you know, share your experience in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.